Hi, my name is Robert McLachlan. I'm the cinematographer on Lovecraft Country, and you're listening to the Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions, and this is the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. So today we're talking with Robert McLachlan ASC CSC. He's the cinematographer for Lovecraft Country on HBO, which is such an amazing show. And Robert does a great job talking to us about how he shot very particular scenes in the episode, his overall lighting philosophy, of course, his lenses and his camera. There's a lot of information here, including a big discussion about shooting underwater and how he was deeply inspired for one of the episodes deeply inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark and Goonies. So there's a lot to unpack here, and you guys are going to absolutely love it. So I'm here with Robert McLachlan, ASC CSC, and the cinematographer of Lovecraft Country. Robert, thank you so much for joining the Go Creative Show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Now, the last time you were on, we were talking about your work on Game of Thrones, and particularly the epic Loot Crate battle. And we have that episode available on gocreativeshow.com for you guys to check it out. We talked about a bunch of your work, too, in that one. But we're here today specifically to narrow in on Lovecraft Country, which is just an excellent show, and probably one of the most surprising shows I think I've seen in a while. Surprising to me, meaning it really blurs the line between science fiction and kind of this period piece and blends it in such a genius way. And I think you did an excellent job on that. So first, congratulations on such a great show.
Well, I think the whole crew and especially the writers did a fabulous job, and especially and the art department they gave us the best sets I've had since Game of Thrones to photograph for sure.
Yeah, money was spent on this show.
Money was definitely spent on this show, especially in the vis effects end of things. They're just wrapping up the season finale. I think it's got something like 600 vis effects shots in it, which is rivaling Game of Thrones at its most vis effects heavy. So, they've really gone to town on it, and I'm very proud of the work that we did on it. And, I got the call about this. I was all set to go back and do season 7 of Ray Donovan, which I'd been shooting for several years, and was a very satisfying show to work with. And they'd made me a producer and a director on it as well. But
oh, nice.
But I was getting, as a cinematographer, you don't want to stick on the same thing for too long. It's just, no matter how hard you try, it's easy to get complacent and stale. And what happened was the start date for that had pushed for several reasons. They didn't have any scripts ready in time. And during that push period, the script for Lovecraft Country came across the transom, and I just was blown away. I mean, I quickly read the book, watched the pilot. I'd never seen anything like this before. And for a cinematographer, it clearly was going to offer a lot of opportunity to do something really interesting. And the other big thing was that Showtime was not interested in changing their camera format. We'd been using the same one that I'd used for years. I wanted to try something a bigger scope and recording format, and 6K had come out. The Sony Venice had come out, large format lenses with beautiful shallow depth of field, which is so much more cinematic. I saw that as an opportunity to really put it through its paces on Lovecraft Country, which was a show big enough to warrant it. And I think the proof is in the pudding, because it's a great looking show.
It really is. So what were you using on Ray Donovan with Showtime?
We were still shooting 2K Sony, Arri Alexa, Cook S4 lenses, Ingenue Optimos, which was basically the same package I'd been using. It's the identical package to what we used on Game of Thrones for years, and I've been basically using it since 2010 when I got my first Alexa, and it's nice to work with tools that you're super comfortable with, and you don't have to think twice about how they're going to resolve or interpret what you're pointing them at. Like I say, it's important as an artist to not become complacent and to stretch yourself and to try something new. And these new Zeiss full frame lenses, which are T1.5, which is a very large aperture, which means the depth of field is extremely low, very cinematic, more reminiscent of classic anamorphic glass. So, it's got that subconscious psychological feel when you're watching it that you're watching something big. Because, I think I had this conversation years ago with Wes Craven when I was doing a movie with him, one of his last films. And his feeling was that we've all grown, what we associate subconsciously with watching a big movie event is anamorphic, with all the little flaws and optical peculiarities that those lenses have. And they've got a lot more character. That, the focus falls off oddly compared to a very precision, surgically precise spherical lens. And he felt like, he wanted all his movies shot that way so that when people sat down, they felt like, without being conscious of it, we're watching a big movie, if you will. And here we are, there's so much more cinematic television being done. The truth is, I wish I could have shot Game of Thrones with those kind of format of lenses. I mean, I've still seen that show in the resolution and the equipment that we did do it projected on huge screens, and it looks pretty spectacular, but it would have looked that much better still if you were watching in that format had it been done on these newer large format sensors. And just to be clear, the biggest advantage of them, I don't think necessarily the increased resolution, which is very much there, but it's the shallower depth of field you get from having those great big lenses, and controlling depth of field is a wonderful creative tool that you can use in telling your story. And I find it's especially handy and useful when you're doing a horror or some kind of a suspense or horror kind of situation where you want elements out of focus, or you want to be able to draw the viewer's eye to where you want it to go, which didn't used to be an issue with television because it's such a small screen. You didn't have to do that. But if you're, as TVs get bigger, there is a lot more information for the eye to scan, and that it means more fun for the filmmakers to, use your sleight of hand or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
So what exactly were the lenses you were using? I know you probably mentioned it in there, and I just want to kind of focus on that for just a second.
We use these fantastic new Zeiss Supreme lenses, which are cover a very, the full 35 millimeter frame. The nice thing about them, I'd use them a lot in the 90s on shows like Millennium, where we wanted a really cold, precise, clinical look. But for years, I sort of made a shift to Cooks, which had a more roundness to them. I liked the way the focus rolled in and rolled off, and they were sharp, but not too sharp. And now we've got these Zeiss, and they've kind of done the same thing with these new ones. But in addition to that, they've put them in a very lightweight, for their size, package, and incredibly fast aperture, like I mentioned. And that, together with the Sony Venice's potential 2500 ISO, means that you can have a huge stop with a huge amount of depth of field by amping up the ISO, or you can bring your ISO down or dial in an ND filter and be working at T1.5, which is really kind of gorgeous.
Yeah.
Quite awesome. Well, it's hard on the focus pullers, but it sure looks great.
It certainly does. I mean, did you have anything done to the lenses specifically for your production?
We didn't do anything to them. There's now an option that our rental house, Otto Nemens, has available, where you can get in there and you can tune the edges. You can tune the fall off of the focus out to the edge. But these lenses were really new, and that technology is also new. But if I was going into a production now, again, with that stuff, I would definitely, we'd go in with their lens technician and say, okay, let's have it, let's soften around the edges here a little bit. Let's just play with where the sharpness is on it. So they're actually ultimately tunable, albeit using some fairly sophisticated technology. But on that show, I just shot them straight. They were new out of the box, and they look great.
Now I'm trying to find them here. Is it the Zeiss Supreme Prime and Supreme Prime Radiance lenses?
The Radiance weren't available yet. Those ones have lower contrast and have less efficient coatings. So they're more like a vintage lens.
Okay.
In that they flare more, and they've got they'll take a wash of light on them, and so they've got more anomalies built into them that we would expect to use if we were using some old vintage Cooke Pancros, for instance, which
okay.
I carried a set of those for 30 years, and I picked them up. I think they were probably built in the 60s, and they look pretty great, but mechanically they were a pain in the butt. They're always, falling apart on you. These, now Zeiss has a choice between the Supreme Prime Radiance and the regular Supremes. In a perfect world, I mean, if I was going into a show again and there's one in the spring that I'm expecting to do, I think I'd probably carry a set of each and mix and match depending on the needs of the scene.
Yeah, I'm looking at them now, guys. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself as well. Now, I mean, the selection of the camera and selection of the lenses, obviously, you want something that looks beautiful, clearly. You want something that you want to work with, you're excited about. But it has to fit the show. It has to make sense for the show. So were there qualities about the Venice and the lenses that perfectly fit your depiction of the 1950s, which is when the show takes place?
Yeah, well, I didn't want something that was, like super contrasty, and we didn't want to, lay a look on top of the show. We wanted to, we had spectacularly attractive, talented actors, and really great sets and great locations. And I just wanted something that wasn't going to impose itself too much on it, because when you kind of don't have to do that. And also, the lower contrast of them and the way the focus rolled in and out suited my aesthetic, which is to try and be as painterly as possible with the light and naturalistic and non-theatrical. And I think all those elements together came together, combined nicely to give us a gorgeous show that looked right dramatically. Of course, a lot of that comes out of, how you light it and the locations that you choose for a particular scene. But they also, the viewer watching it isn't going to go, you're going to be pulled out of the story by being distracted by, overly obvious camera work, if you will. Because then we're not doing our job. And, the ultimate thing is for the viewer to just be completely engrossed in the story. If they're looking at each other saying, wow, that's a cool shot, they're not caught up in the story at that point. So, I'm always looking for a camera package and all the elements that's going to make me as invisible as possible. Cameramen are supposed to be the invisible guy behind the curtain. Not in front of the camera, and if you start, and it's a thing you see a lot of younger cinematographers do, which is try to get noticed. And if I think if you're doing that, and we've all been guilty of it in our formative years,
yeah.
But if you're, and that's great, and you get noticed for it, but it doesn't necessarily serve the gestalt of telling a story and engaging a viewer.
That's an interesting thought, and I want to go down that road just for a second more, is the idea that the cinematographer is sort of the man behind the curtain. Why is that important, do you think? What does that do to the actors, to the directors? What does it allow to happen on set?
Well, in my case, I try to make an environment be as a part of creating an environment for the actors to feel as comfortable as possible, and to know that I'm there and I'm going to take care of them and make sure they look their best, or at least as right as possible for the scene. So, you're not invisible. You don't, I've heard of guys that just park themselves in the dit tent and they don't come out and they say, they instruct everything over the radio and stuff. You can't do that, because you have to be a presence. The actor needs to know that you're there and looking after them. They have to, the same as they have to know the director is not going to, let them go down a road that's going to make them look foolish or bad or in any way at all. But, they need to know that they're being looked after photographically as well, and that's something I think I've being really good at for a really long time.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I'm curious, do you ever have those conversations with the talent, like at the beginning of a production? Do you sit down with the feature talent, the stars, and talk to them about your particular philosophy and how you are going to support them visually?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I'm somewhat of a shy person. I'm not that forthcoming, that way, but I think if you're enough of a presence and ask the right questions and stuff, for instance, a really useful thing to ask them right off the bat before you even shoot any tests with them is a friend of mine suggested this to me. He says, ask them where they take their selfies from, because they probably know where their best angle is because they've done it 1,000 times.
It's a great idea.
And that's a really good first start. If you ask them that and they ask you, well, why do you want to know? You tell them because that's probably where your best angle is and that we're going to watch out for that. Then right away they know that you're looking out for them.
That's smart. I like that.
And if they're more experienced too, they can tell, the more experienced they are. We're working with a fairly inexperienced younger cast on our show. But if you're working with the old pros knew where their light had to be. A lot of times we'll have, you have an older one come in, they'll do some stunt casting or something like that, say on Game of Thrones, for instance, Diana Rigg, who, in her case, she didn't care where the light came from. She just wanted, if it was good for her character, that was fine. But some of the, I've worked with some former TV and Hollywood divas who, see that you're going to half light them with a big soft rag, and they go, no.
Really?
I guess, and she didn't do this. She didn't say anything, but I did a scene with a number of scenes with Anne Margaret, who was really getting on. If you can find that scene on Ray Donovan, she looks like $1 million. And the interesting thing with her was that she didn't look like Anne Margaret until I lit her exactly the way she'd been lit in every one of the movies that made her famous. And She was always lit the same way. She was never lit, with like soft side light or anything like that. It was a hard light almost above the lens, right down the pipe. And as soon as we did that and we raised the camera up a little bit, because I did some tests with her, played around. Obviously, she's in her late 70s at that point, I think. As we raised the camera a little bit and brought her key light around, all of a sudden, bam, that's Anne Margaret. And she looks like $1 million. And she's almost 80 and she's like amazing. And that obviously worked because I finished that season. That episode aired and I was over in Belfast prepping Game of Thrones and my phone rings. It was a number I didn't recognize. And, I picked it up and it was Anne Margaret with an incredibly, her sexy husky voice saying, I just want to thank you for making me look so fantastic. I couldn't be happier. It was a great experience. So
that is great.
That was nice. Now, having said that, the showrunner at the time, she didn't want her to look great, and she was mad at me for making her look so good. She wanted her to look older and more haggard, but I wasn't gonna do that. We got through that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask because the way that you light somebody doesn't necessarily their character may not necessarily need the same lighting that they want, personally. I mean, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Most of the time, you're primarily serving the story. It didn't hurt us at all that Anne Margaret looked great. She was, in fact, the showrunner's biggest complaint was that it had been written for the Polo Lounge, the scene, and the production designer had put us in his friend's minimalist, modern Melrose Avenue restaurant. And, she was mad at me because I didn't make it look like the Polo Lounge. But, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
Yeah.
And in the end, once it aired and everything, everybody was happy. But, you're right. You run into that from time to time. For instance, years ago, I was doing a series that Chris Carter was the showrunner on, and he wanted the wife to look as haggard and worn and careworn as possible. I mean, she was a very pretty woman, but he didn't want me taking any special paints. He didn't want me using any diffusion filter. He would actually look at the camera reports in the editing room and see if we'd used any diffusion on them. And if we had, I'd get a phone call from him chiding me. So the way but then I had to be on set with this woman who was really unhappy with how she looked, and really, because she was like just starting to get a little over that hill. So what I did was, we were shooting that show on very sharp Zeiss primes at the time. And I took out one of my 70, I would shoot all her close-ups on my old 75 millimeter Cooke Pancro lens, which was very soft and forgiving and not that sharp. So when Chris looked at the camera reports, he'd just see that there were no filters, and we shot it clean with the 75. So that way Megan, the actress, was happy, and Chris was happy.
That's sneaky. I like it.
That's sneaky.
Well, at the same time, I mean, when you have these personalities on set that really understand who they are, what their brand is, what their character is, I can imagine that they can become a little bit forceful sometimes if they don't like the way that things are going.
Yeah, it can be. Years ago, I did a TV movie with Patty Duke, and the director wanted it to, he was an old English fellow, and he wanted it to be very naturalistic, very soft, very non-theatrical, and what have you. And the thing was, if you shot Patty Duke any way than she'd been photographed her whole life, and certainly on the show, she was unrecognizable as Patty Duke. And only when if you go back and look at that old TV show that made her a star, the Helen Keller story, the camera is always well above her eye line, way above her eye line, and she's always lit very much right from the front. And not until we photographed her that way did she even look like Patty Duke, and only then was she happy. And doing things like having a huge, beautiful, soft 12 by 12, coming in, lighting her 3/4 front with a super soft light. If the camera was anywhere but directly in front of her face, she wasn't happy, and it didn't look like her. She knew right where the camera had to be and where the light had to be. And, it was, I think that's really about, the only time where there was, for the first week or two, until I managed to finesse the director into being a little bit, coming around and backing off on his more naturalistic way of shooting that he wanted to do. That I've had an issue. Most of the time, I would say really wonderful relationships with the actors. Once that level of trust is there.
Now on Lovecraft, you have a cast filled with, relatively new people. Like you don't have a cast of every single person is recognizable. You had mentioned even earlier, I mean, they're relatively inexperienced in the business. They're just kind of getting one of their first big shows. Are you feeling like you are helping them define their look on screen?
Up to a point, but you have to keep in mind that everybody was in period costume and period hair and so on and so forth. So, not to say that they weren't incredibly photogenic. I mean, we did have Michael Williams and Courtney B. Vance, who were old pros, and they came in and just saw stuff, maybe caught a glimpse of the monitor. They were wonderful, and the younger cast were so photogenic. I mean, you just absolutely couldn't go wrong with them. I mean, both the and obviously quite a big African American cast on the show. And actually, just backing up a bit, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to give the Venice a go with this, because I think it does have more latitude, more contrast range than the other options. And we had these white cast, Caucasian cast who are almost alabaster and blonde, and then we had some very dark complected people, and I could have them easily in the same lighting setup on the same shot, and everybody looked great.
I want to talk a little bit more about the choice to have the Sony Venice, particularly were you testing any other camera lens packages before you jumped on the show, or did you know right off the bat Venice was your choice?
I knew I wanted to use it. I had just come back from NAB, where a friend of mine, John Joffin, had shot test material that they screened at NAB on a huge screen for both the Venice and the Zeiss lenses. And I checked all that stuff out there and looked at, talked to some colorists about the color science in it, and had, immediately had the confidence that if you put X in the front, Y was going to come out the back. You just, and that's all that's all I want anymore as a cinematographer. I mean, once upon a time, I understood photochemical science and emulsions and all that kind of thing. I started out as a still photographer, developing my own film and going into the darkroom. And I got that. But now with the digital cameras, I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm more interested in what I'm doing in front of the camera and making as painterly and as natural and beautiful images as I can. I don't care what happens inside that black box as long as I get out what I see in my mind's eye at the other end. And, I've had this exact conversation with Roger Deakins once or twice, about that whole thing. And, when the more geeky people start picking our brains about the science of digital recording, our eyes glaze over, because I don't really care that much, to be honest. It just becomes a tool. And I know a good painter, painters once upon a time had to learn how to make their own pigments, but I've done this so long, I don't have time for that anymore. I just want a tool that's going to be reliable. I know it's going to be very, very, very consistent. And, you get that with the Sony, you get it with the Alexa. I'm going to be using one or the other of those, I expect, for as long as I'm working.
Yeah.
I along with other cinematographers, including Roger, also said, I'm never going digital. I'm never shooting digital. I'm never shooting digital. I'm never shooting digital. And then we saw the Alexa and went, oh, so
yes,
I might shoot digital.
Exactly. Well, you have to be open to new things, certainly. But once they get to a certain point, then you can adopt them.
I usually prefer someone else to be the guinea pigs, but not to say I haven't been an early adopter once or twice, and I kind of was with this system because I had a lot of faith in it.
Now, I think one of the trends that I'm seeing in cinematography for TV shows and films is less reliance on creating a look in post or creating like a heavy-handed color treatment. I'm seeing a lot of shows becoming a little bit more naturalistic in their approach. And I noticed that particularly in your show. Now, obviously, you had the benefit of having a big budget and incredible sets, and you were able to shoot wide and have an entire environment that looked amazing, great talent, all of that. But are you starting to see that trend as well on your end, that people are, kind of being a little bit more natural and letting the lighting be the look, letting the cinematography be the look instead of having it be applied after?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the case. And it comes down to, I think part of it is that the cameras are so good and they're so sensitive that it's letting all of us be a little bit more naturalistic. That's certainly been my aesthetic for a long time now. I mean, I call it enhanced naturalism. You're not, and when I see a show on TV where they have clearly imposed a look in post, 9 times out of 10, if you were to take that look off, you'd have some very banal, shitty photography. So often, I think it's a Band-Aid that you lay on top after the fact to compensate for the fact that you didn't have time or the resources or very good looking. You might not have had very good looking sets or locations to photograph as well. I forget what it was, but I literally was channel flipping the other night and I saw a show and I went, whoa, this has been very heavily manipulated after the fact. And I think probably because it was the original photography was so average that it just wasn't going to stand out in any way, shape, or form without having a look imposed upon it. And it was kind of retro too. I mean, they were crushing the blacks and kind of doing the stuff that, and desaturating the stuff that we were doing. I was doing a Millennium back in 1997.
Yeah.
My feeling with that stuff is, been there, done that. Let's get on. And these cameras record so nicely, and the gradation of tones and so forth is so good now that you can actually, with a little bit of atmosphere, you can actually make something look like a great Dutch master oil painting from the golden age of, in the 1600s or whatever. And in fact, I'm never happier than when I have dailies that every frame looks like it could have been painted 400 years ago.
Yeah.
By a good painter.
Yes. Not a bad painter. Something really shitty could be 400 years ago, too.
That's true. And there are plenty.
Let's talk about your...
let's not look at those.
I want to talk about your approach to lighting, your lighting philosophy for Lovecraft Country. Takes place in the 1950s. You're using these really sharp, brand new lenses from Zeiss. You've got the Sony Venice. You've got all the information you need coming into the camera. So how are you lighting it to reflect this time period?
I'm not trying to make it look like, the first thing I didn't want to do was light in a way that would look like it was actually shot in the 50s, because that's a lot of very hard light with low, very insensitive film stocks. So why not just, let the, we had superb production design, incredible costumes, great hair and makeup, good locations. We had the support of a spectacularly good visual effects crew who I could rely on to, when they said that, don't worry about that, we're going to put the L in the background. We're going to, we can mitigate that. We can take that light out of the shot. It's going to make it look better if you have it there. So really, when you've got something beautiful to photograph, all you have to do is photograph it beautifully. And and in my case, my approach is to be as natural as possible. And I keep going back to Freddie Young's quote. He got 3 Oscars for Ryan's Daughter, Dr. Zhivago, and Lawrence of Arabia. And after he got his 3rd one, somebody supposedly asked him, Mr. Young, what's the secret to you make such beautiful pictures? What's your secret? And he said, well, there's no secret. The trick is to only take pictures of beautiful things.
I love that. I haven't heard that, but I love that. So, yes, that's true. You've got beautiful things in front of the camera, but can you give us a little bit of insight into maybe the techniques? What lights are you rolling with on average? Are you kind of like a big soft key kind of guy, or are you a more narrow, harder lights kind of guy? What makes sense for this show?
It depends on the location, and I'll use everything. And I think the most pleasing photograph or, images usually have a combination of all of the above.
Yeah.
And a lot of it just comes down to taste and where, a combination of both hard and soft. In terms of the fixtures I use, I still really like great big lens, either HMI or tungsten fixtures. Because the quality of light that they throw is not like anything that any LED can use. Having said that, I also used a lot of the newest Stereotubes, which are remote controlled. Battery is self-contained right in them. You can stick them. You can just stick them up in places you could never have a light before to enhance. I was using them a lot in the hallways and one of the sets to enhance the candlesticks that were sticking out of the walls. You couldn't see them. You never knew there was another light there, but it was emitting a more pleasing light on faces as they walked by them or landed near them than you would get otherwise. And when you're done with it there, you could pull it off that and clip it up somewhere else. So, that's the latest technology in terms of lighting. We're using a lot of airy sky panels, again, which are incredibly useful because, you've got that full spectrum control, but still, my favorite light that I lit 90% of the close-ups on both Game of Thrones and Ray Donovan and Westworld with is a Dado. It's called a Dado Parabeam or we just call it an octadome. It's a 3, 5, or 7 foot wide umbrella type looking light, but it has a very narrow footprint, so it doesn't stick out too far. But it's a broad source with an egg crate in it. Or often through an extra rag. And what I love about that is that it is a tungsten light. It's only 1,000 watts, but try as I might, I have never been able to get a close-up look or skin tone, be it black or white, looking as nice using any kind of an LED source, regardless how many layers of diffusion you're going through or how you're manipulating that light. I've never been able to get a close-up to look as good using an LED source as I can with a tungsten element burning. There's no substitute for the full spectrum image of a tungsten filament burning. I don't think.
On skin, or really on
skin.
anything, but on skin for sure.
On anything, but that's a fixture. And the thing I love about it is that it's very lightweight. You can put it on a lightweight stand. You don't need three guys to move it. It's so light, even I can move it. Even if you want to slide it around a little bit, it comes in, it comes out. So I'll bring something like that in and light our close-ups with that whenever I have the elbow room for it.
What was that light again? I'm going to try to find it so I can put it in the show notes.
It's made by Dado. Octodome Para. I don't know what their official name is.
Let's see. Something popped up when I was searching. Dado Light Octodome. Look at this. Here it is. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see it right here. All right, I'll put a link to it for you guys. So this is kind of your preferred close-up light.
I love it. I mean, the electrics grumble a bit about it because it comes in a case and you have to put all the rods. It's a little bit of a pain to put together and take apart. But, it's not like an umbrella that pops up immediately. And they're a little bit delicate. You have to change the reflectors out, if the guys aren't careful and they close it too soon, the bulb will burn it. But, I've had mine now for 10 years and I just love that thing. And like I say, I was introduced to it originally on Game of Thrones where we had, basically one for each set. And I just fell in love with it immediately because it just produced such lovely results. And if you watch Game of Thrones certainly from about season 3 on, I bet, of the numerous cinematographers who did episodes on that, we all fell back on that fixture. And, like I say, I'm just prepping a movie now and introducing my crew to it here as well. Thing is, rental companies, the lighting rental companies tend not to like that kind of stuff because they're a little bit delicate and they need a lot of maintenance. And you have to be careful with them. You can't beat the crap out of them like you can with, the old studio stuff. But I haven't found anything that makes nicer close-ups than that light.
I want to talk about episode 4 of Lovecraft Country. This has got to be one of the most fun episodes of anything you've shot. I mean, talk about you're underwater. There's fire. There's it's craziness. I mean, deeply. I mean, at least to me, it had to have been inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's just too much in there to not be inspired by it. So, could just to bring everybody up to
Raiders
speed,
of the Lost Ark and Goonies.
Goonies, exactly.
Goonies.
Just to bring everybody up to speed. Can you just sort of get everybody up to speed for those that may have not seen this particular episode? What is it about episode 4 that made it so fun and so exciting for you?
We've got the element of magic, which lets you get away with a lot of stuff. That there's magic spells and so on and so forth. Grounded in reality. And that particular episode, I mean, the part of the goal of it was to, for the first time almost ever, make a Raiders of the Lost Ark type, Indiana Jones type heroes, the heroes like you have, the kids in Goonies doing adventure stuff, but it's African Americans doing it, which is unique. And, that's changing and everything, but, it's part of the underlying theme of that series, which is to deliver a lesson about the history of racism and bigotry in America, wrapped up in this crazy sci-fi fantasy, horror monster venue that we've got. So that kind of folded into it nicely. But, having gotten past that point, then we were into building some really spectacular sets. The biggest one certainly that I've worked on since Game of Thrones. Our heroes go to Boston to try and get some answers. They find their way into a secret catacomb, have to choose which tunnel to go down. I mean, it's just like somebody's going to make a good video game out of this at some point, I think. They are faced with chasms, with hidden booby traps and pendulums. They get into a series of tunnels that are affected by the rising tide. They are sloshing through water through much of it. Then they have to swim through water. We've got underwater work. We built a gigantic set with sloping floors so that we could slowly, raise and lower the water and change the depth of it and so forth as the tide is supposedly rising.
Yeah.
They get through this, and then they go through a secret trap door, very Goonies-esque, and find themselves in a sunken but somehow airtight, watertight pirate ship with a bunch of mummified Arawak Indians in it. They have to get a secret scroll, get out of it, get back out. There's fire, there's explosions of the water. We had made a massive dump tank and completely destroyed the set. It was very spectacular. Then they get back and they find this elevator that magically takes them back into their house in Chicago. And so we had the elevator on a hydraulic rig that would raise and lower in and out of the water. Shooting in water is really difficult. Logistically it was a really tough shoot. And I got to take my hat off to my grip crew who did an amazing job. And they actually, for all the work working on the water, they came up with they cut a boogie board in half and made a little catamaran, and we put the Arri Maxima stabilized head on it, put the camera on that, and the dolly grip could push it around through the water. No matter how rough the water got, the camera stayed perfectly steady because we didn't want to get into too much of a handheld kind of ropey feel because we just felt like we were a bigger, classier show than that. But it was the only way to get into these tunnels, and the operator operated it remotely, and that thing worked like just great. Do
you have any pictures of that?
I have one picture of it, I think.
Oh, if you can share that would be excellent.
I'll send that to you afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be so cool to see. So you just took a regular old boogie board, sliced that in half, and that's what you mounted the head onto. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, the Arri Maxima, which is a lightweight head. It's like a Ronin. You can conceivably, carry it. I'd been introduced to it on Game of Thrones when I had a walk and talk with Jon Snow down a flight of stairs that had been built by the Crusaders that just on this Spanish cliffside. And there's no way we could have done it with a Steadicam. The guy would have broken his ankle because none of the steps were even. So we put the camera on the Maxima, a grip on either side of it, walked down the stairs, watching where they were going while the camera pointed back on the two shot that we were shooting. The operator operated it remotely from the foot of the stairs, and it's a flawless, beautiful walking two shot that we couldn't have gotten any other way. And then we also had to bring it out on the beach. We had walk and talks on this huge windswept beach with Daenerys and her cohort, and it was so windy. The Steadicam was like heeling over sideways. So instead, we brought the Maxima out. You can mount it on a car. It's very lightweight. It doesn't have to have technicians come with it like Scorpio heads and some of the bigger, serious stabilized heads do. It's something you can just have in your kit. So it's a very useful tool.
I'm not familiar with it, but I'm looking at pictures of it right now, and it's just kind of the Arri equivalent to, like you said, the Ronin or something like that.
Right.
But it looks a little bit more robust in there than what you're...
It's heavier.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's heavier and more heavy duty. But I used it. I shot the pilot for Batwoman last year, and we didn't want to, in cases where, we didn't want to be Steadicam. We wanted to feel as much like a feature as we could. We wanted to be as locked off as we could. And by taking a black arm vibration mount, which you can put on any number of mounts onto, attach that to the dolly, put the Maxima on that. You could then use the dolly to do a walk and talk down a rough city sidewalk without having to take the time to lay track or dance floor. Watching guys lay dance floor, which I think a lot of them love, just drives me around the bend. It's just like I don't want to wait for that. A lot of the time, it's just if I can possibly help it. And this is a way to get around it sometimes.
When you're going into episode 4, did you know right from the script that this was going to be inspired by, like you said, Goonies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, that it kind of had that look to it? Or was that something that you developed along the way?
I knew that was the inspiration for the script, definitely. I mean, the writers made no bones about that this is we're making our African American Raiders Goonies. episode. And I think the only concession to that I made was that I kind of leaned into a little more than I normally would the lighting motif of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think, was it Jeffrey Unsworth? I can't remember who shot those. I think it was Unsworth, British DP. Anyway, with where the motif, and it's reflected in all the posters, was, with the orange and blue combination of lighting that you saw a lot in movies during that era.
Yeah.
So I amped up the orange from the firelight and the torches and the lanterns a little bit more. And, whereas, in contemporary time, I think most of us are backing off from that electric blue moonlight kind of thing. I eased into a little bit more blue into it. You'll see it in the color scheme and in the lighting in there. It's a tiny bit more strident, but I just subconsciously wanted to kind of like put that thought in feeling in everybody's heads that, just tie us visually together that way. But apart from that, I didn't really, I didn't do too much, in terms of, tipping my hat to those movies.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that tipping the hat is in the wardrobe and the locations and all of that stuff. I mean, they're just so reminiscent of classic scenes from the films.
Right. And the music too.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Good point. I want to talk about the techniques that you used for the underwater parts of episode 4. We don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about that with DPs because a lot of DPs don't really do it. So you just had this opportunity in episode 4 of Lovecraft Country, and I'd love to hear about how you approached it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually obviously do the underwater operating myself. I've got operators. We brought guys in who do that all the time.
Sure.
Having said that, once upon a time I used to, because back before the days of video assist, I'd get an underwater operator. You'd tell them, describe to them exactly what you wanted. They'd go down with the underwater housing. They'd shoot it. You'd say, did you get this? Did it was like this? Did you get this? And they go, yeah. And then you get your dailies back the next day, and it didn't look anything like that. So I got so frustrated. I went and got my diving ticket. I learned how to do it myself.
No way.
And I just started doing it myself. And then I knew if I had it or not. But that was a long time ago. It's a whole different ballgame now. And I've got a lot more, plates to keep spinning when you're on a production this big. And obviously this set had a massive soft light built above it because we couldn't be, doing a lot of specific lighting. So our overall sort of basic fill level came from this very, very soft, slightly blue soft light. I had them keep the tops of the tunnel open, knowing that if we did catch them, VisFX would fill it in, because it would have been, if they're absolutely totally enclosed tunnels, it would have been, we'd have been in there forever and it wouldn't have looked very good. And interestingly, one of the things we encountered that you normally don't run into, we had the latest underwater housing for the full on Venice camera. But the problem is for the actors' comfort, obviously the water had to be heated up. They had it pretty warm in there because they were going to be in it all day, and the crew we were going to be in there. I mean, I was in there too, but I didn't, I wasn't sort of stuck there for 12 hours like a lot of them were. So the water was very warm, and the result was that the camera in that underwater housing overheated. And my first assistant, Steve Early, had the genius idea of he quickly got the drivers to go and get us some dry ice. We opened the housing up, packed the bag with dry ice, closed it up, and that way the camera wouldn't overheat, because underwater housings are made to use in the ocean where it's never an issue because It's cool. It's not 98 degrees or 102 degrees or whatever they had it at, and that solved the problem, which was I think that's typical sort of film crew thinking. Solving, finding solutions to problems in a hurry, so anyway, just backing up to actually shooting under the water, I didn't have any underwater lights per se. We had what looked like a period flashlight that we had waterproofed and put a waterproof LED flashlight into that would last a long time. And so, totally unrealistic, but so is the rest of the story if you
Exactly.
look at it that way. I don't think that bumped for anybody.
When you're taking an elevator from a supernatural world to your home, no one's going to worry about the flashlight.
not too much. Yeah. No. And the lights stayed on in the elevator too. That was very handy.
So So basically nothing underwater except for that flashlight. Large soft source up top. What about in situations where there's close-ups or you're just a little bit closer and you need to, I mean, there must have been points where you needed to just get a little bit of fill onto someone, or did you just embrace the darkness?
We kind of went with it, and we also had, on the close-ups when they're like above the water, I had, and you'll see it in the photo I send you of the floating rig, a little light called the Litra, Litra, and the unit itself is very tiny. It's rechargeable. You can put a little softbox on it. It's something I used a lot on that show under the camera. Just very, very subtly to open the eyes up. And again, that's a little tool. If an experienced actor sees a little light under the camera, they're immediately going to know that they're going to look okay. And so psychologically, even if it's not emitting very much light at all, it's a good way to tell an actor, we're looking after you. We're going to see your eyes and stuff. But the beauty of the Litra is that there's an app. You can control it on your phone. So, for instance, if you're doing a push in on a face, with the old system, the light would get too bright by the time you were right into their face with the camera, and it wouldn't be consistent. You can dim them by a Bluetooth on a dimmer on your phone. So I can just stand by the camera and watch as it gets closer and dial it down on the phone. It's the most wonderful tool. I haven't heard too many people talking about it, but I carry two of them all the time, and it's a great thing. So I'm not ashamed to give them a plug because
and
I
you
think
like
it's
the
a very
color
good
temperature
product.
out of this one because there's a lot of competition in this space. This is a consumer light. I mean, first of all, I love it when big films and shows use these little consumer products that any of us can just buy and use on our own shoots. It's so exciting. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes. But you were happy with the color temperature that it put out?
It's a little bit limited, but that's easy to, if you want to warm it up. I think, having said that, I think it goes from, I want to say around 2000 Kelvin to around 5,600 or 6,000 maybe. So, I mean, that's a pretty good range for day-to-day use. And then, again, if you want to, put a little piece of CTO or something on that little softbox, that's very easy to do if you want to work it a little warmer for candlelight or what have you.
Yeah. And I can see right here, there's little barn doors. There's a little filter set. Oh, how cute!
Yeah, don't waste your money on the barn doors or the filters. You won't use them. But that little mini softbox is very handy.
I'm looking at that right here. I mean, we're talking about a kit that's like under. If you just get the regular Litra Pro, it's $200. Then a little softbox. Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that stuff. Now you've derailed
fantastic.
me. Now I love gear like this. It's fun. It's like not super expensive. It's just fun little things like that. I love it. All right, so back to, and we just have a couple minutes left, but just to kind of round out our conversation about the underwater filmmaking, is there any, what do you think is probably the biggest challenge of shooting underwater, or maybe something that people don't understand when they jump into this? We had a similar conversation a few episodes ago about shooting day for night. And the conversation was kind of about how you have a perception of what day for night is until you do it. And then you realize that it isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. Is there something similar to that with underwater cinematography?
Not so much. I mean, it's really communication. And, just the frustrations of it, just the time it takes. You've got, like reloading the camera has to come out, has to get dry. Cards have to go in and stuff. Logistically, everything just takes a little longer. But I mean, I've done a lot of underwater work with one show or another, and that's really you just have to allow more time for it. And the other big one that everybody forgets, and we ran into this on Game of Thrones for the last shot in that loot train attack when Jaime sinks into the river. They wanted to build this whole underwater world that he sunk into with like burnt wagons and bodies and stuff and with a sandy bottom and so forth. And I told them 8 million times that as soon as you got anybody in there, it was just going to be, no matter how strong the filters were, you weren't going to be able to see 2 feet in front of the camera. And also, actors have to be able to clear their sinuses as they sink, and you can't just shoot something like that. They went ahead with it anyway. And they threw away a whole day's work, probably $250,000 worth of production, And I told him,
wow,
that day was a complete write-off, other than one shot looking up of a fireball going overhead and a body falling in. That's the only bit they used. And in the end, they did exactly what I told them they should do, which is film him dry for wet, which is how I did a last shot in the season, I think, 6 finale of Ray Donovan, when he jumps into the East River. Doing it for real, close up on an actor, their faces get all bulgy. You're way better off doing it dry for wet with smoke and ripply light through the smoke, and with a little bit of help from VisFX to put particulate in the water. It's always much more successful, and needless to say, the actors are a lot happier that way too.
I've never heard of that term, dry for wet, and I know the exact scene you're talking about with Ray Donovan when he jumps in the river. So, are you simply just saying that you're just shooting him and everything is visual effects?
Very little visual effects, the truth is, and that was something that came together at the last minute, because a second unit had gone out and filmed Liev Schreiber underwater, and the lighting was like they put a tube, like a underwater fluorescent tube, right under his face. His eyes weren't focused. He's got short hair anyway, so it doesn't move around in the water. And sure. I showed it and it was our last day of shooting in LA before we moved to New York to do the New York sequences. I showed that picture to Liev, who was getting ready to get on a plane and go home. And I said, we can't let this go. But I know what we can do. So we built a black box. I didn't have time to get there's some great old school rock and roll lights that make it look like exactly the way light looks when it's shining down through the ocean or water. Mm-hmm. I didn't have time to get any of those, so I used what I'd done on low budget shows in the past, which is get big, huge sheets of gel and bounce a light off them and ripple the gel, which gives you that dancing water effect that when you're underwater. Put a whole pile of smoke in, overcrank the camera, and got a close up that needed almost no help at all to look like it was actually underwater.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. That's a discussion in and of itself, but we've completely run out of time. I so enjoy talking to you. You're really good at explaining the techniques of how to do these things. It's hard to do that, to explain these techniques, especially on shows that you shot months ago. You do a really good job of explaining it to the audience, and I know they love it. And thank you so much for being back on. Lovecraft Country, it's on HBO right now, so you guys can check it out for yourself. I'd love to get that photo, Robert, so we can share that with our audience of the underground rig. And really, if you have any photos from the show that you think would be relevant to our discussion, please send them along, because those are always really, really helpful. But the show is beautiful. It's amazing. I expect nothing less from Robert McLachlan, ASC, CSC. And thank you just so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I'd love to come in, day for night. There's something to talk about sometime, because that's an interesting world. And if anybody's watching episode 2, there's a great sequence that's supposed to take place at dusk. They wanted to shoot it at night, but it would have looked like night in the woods. Would not have looked very good. It would have been 2 full all-nighters in the Georgia woods in July. It would have been miserable. We shot all that during broad daylight, using a lot of smoke and to mitigate the sun. And you watch that, tell me it wasn't actually shot at magic hour.
Yeah, I know
great.
I know the exact scene you're talking about, and it really is fantastic. So, Robert, thank you so much. What is next for you? What's your next project?
I'm actually sitting in a production office in Toronto prepping a little horror film with a aimed at an adolescent kid audience. We start shooting in a week and a half, and working in the realm of in the era of COVID is very interesting.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it. I haven't actually done a feature in a few years now, and it's nice to do something big enough to get your teeth into.
I love that. Good for you. That sounds great. I'm glad you're working. I'm glad the industry is creeping back, and it looks like better days are ahead. Certainly.
Amen.
All right, I want to thank Robert McLachlan for coming on the show and, of course, talking about his work on Lovecraft Country and Ray Donovan and all sorts of stuff, Millennium, all sorts of stuff. I love having Robert on the show because he does such a great job of explaining things. Like that's just, it's hard to do. And he does a really good job of it. So if you love the show, let us know, let Robert know. We'd love to hear your feedback. And you can do that at gocreativeshow.com because it will take you to all of the various places where we post stuff. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can follow us there as well. Oh, by the way, we are doing these extra little episodes every once in a while, like these sneaky little episodes that we only put on YouTube. In fact, our last one is all about how they did the remote filmmaking for the Emmys with Jason LaCourie. So if you don't follow us on YouTube, you should be following us there because we're going to sneak in these little extra episodes for those YouTube followers. Just a little surprise for you guys. So, of course, we want to thank you for supporting the show. And thank you all for listening and sharing and keeping the show alive for so long. We're almost into our 8th year. I can't believe it. But I wouldn't have it any other way because I love doing this show and I really love our audience out there at the Go Creative Show world. So thank you so much for supporting us. I also want to thank our sponsors, MZ Education for Creatives and PostLab, stress-free collaboration in Final Cut Pro and Premiere. And of course, the team behind the scenes, Connor Crosby, our producer. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com, and Matt Russell from gainstructure.com. His whole team mixes and masters and makes the show sound so good. So thank you to Matt and all those guys out there. All right, that's it for us, but we're going to see you next week on another episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.